As I caught her red-handed, her eyes went wide as she was horrified for her life. She started to beg me for forgiveness and started to create a melodrama. But it was too late for that. I could have forgiven her mistake, but the betrayal and cheating were something that could never be forgiven since it had cost me my career. It all started when I graduated from the police academy and was on my way to become an officer. So I took a few days off to celebrate my success. I went on a cruise with my friends. That's when I met Jenny. It was an instant click. Her charming and attractive personality made me fall in love with her. I took her to the expensive restaurants and brought her really nice and expensive clothes. She was a shopaholic, so we went on shopping sprees in various malls. I bought her everything that her fingers laid upon. We were having so much fun in our life that I forgot the responsibilities and ground realities of day-to-day life. I was falling madly in love with her, and I totally neglected all the shortcomings that were pretty obvious and in front of me. She was just a compulsive buyer with no impulse control and always out to purchase new clothes, always attending parties, and there were no such thing of decency in her, but she was having the time of her life. I totally ignored all the red signals, and that cost me heavily. After the holidays, I came back and joined the police task force and started my work right away and got busy with the job. I was totally dedicated to my career. We remained in touch and started our conversation on a daily basis. We grew pretty close to each other in no time, and just after a couple of months, we got married. It was a bumpy ride from the very start since we had very different ideologies towards life and we saw our future very differently, but just for the sake of our love and commitment, we were very tolerant of our differences. Relationship was toxic from the very start, but it was me who took notice between date and life and realized how roughly my hard-earned money was spent in just one thing that I did not knew that she had it, and it is another across which I discovered it like that, which became the reason of power ultimate. I simply could not express how toxic her personality was. The worst mess I have encountered in my life, and I was in such a painful situation after marrying her that I started to regret my decision. But since I was in a committed relationship and I had pledged myself that I would never do such things as cheating or leave her, on the other hand, she was not only a huge spender but was not much into saving and was almost always having parties or going out and having fun, and even it was hard on weekends because her friends were always going or coming. It was the worst mess of my life. Over time, we started having huge fights. We had so many disagreements. All I wanted was to have a stable partner who could support me emotionally, and together we could start a really good family, while she just wanted to have a good time and was only into having parties and fun. There was no such concept of family in her mind, and she did not want any children. It was such a difference in both of our personalities that we simply could not overcome it. She was just with me because of money, since I was a government employee and with all the added benefits. Things started to take a turn when she left her job and was really relying on my paycheck. Although I was pretty generous in giving her a good handsome amount of money to spend, yet she started going out on parties and almost always was unavailable on weekends. One fine evening when I came back from work, she was taking a bath and I saw her phone open on a couch. Out of curiosity, I started going through it. To my surprise, she was cheating behind my back for last 3 months, and the guy she was having such an intimate conversation was a drug dealer, and the latest conversation she had was to bring the most expensive drug he had on the table. This left me full of anger, and this betrayal was simply not enough for me to digest. So instead of shouting at her or starting to inquire about her, I immediately left the home and went on a long drive to process this and think about it and to come up with some sort of a solution. While I was on a long drive, I was constantly having very painful thoughts. Because from the very beginning, I had a hint that she was basically a party girl and just wanted to have a good time. If somehow that needs were not met, she would have found someone else to get the quick fix. But getting into drugs was something that I had not anticipated, but she was a pretty regular user of a drug, and this was a secret that she kept from me for the last 2 years. This was a very painful moment for me to digest, but since I have collected the number of that drug dealer and saved all of their conversations, the next day as I went to my office, I called my personal assistant and gave her the number to track it and find out what had been happening on this number. As we have the longest debates of all the criminals and having access to track any cell phone, we started investigating him. To our surprise, he was really a big drug dealer and a member of the largest cartel who was into selling all sorts of drug. We opened a full investigation chapter on him and started to follow up the lead and started tracking his live locations and all the possible exit points that he had been visiting and supplying the drugs. This was not only one of the biggest cases of my period, but it also seemed promising and rewarding if we executed it successfully. I was happy, but I was also pretty angry and sad about the things that my wife had been doing behind my back. So after a week or so, at a fine evening, I took her on a long drive and started having conversations with her and reminded her all the good and memorable things that we have had been doing and how fortunate I was to have her in my life just to see her reaction. To which I saw a pretty blank and not responsive expressions of her. She was very distant and was replying just for the sake of formality with whatever I was saying. Otherwise, there was no soul in a relationship. Finally, I said since she was in love and committed to life with me, she would tell me the truth and never had anything to hide. To which she said that she had never lied to me and had always been a faithful wife. The reality was painful, and that I already knew, yet I kept quiet. I politely asked her if any of her friends she knew had been doing drugs. We are going on a drug bust. It would be very helpful information for my career. If she knew any of her friends or anyone in the club who has been doing drugs, that would really help me track the actual criminals. To which she replied she had never done any sort of drug use or knew anybody who was into this stuff. It was such a painful thing for me, but again, I maintained my composure. After knowing that she was in total denial and was never going to open up on her side of the story, and while working on the same case, we went on planning to do a drug bust on him on coming week, and while my whole personal life was already pretty disturbed, but I did not want it to think about any of that. I just wanted to focus on my work. Coming Friday, she told me that she would be going out with her friends to a town next door, and they will be attending her best friend's wedding. Since I could not stop her, I had to agree to that. On the other hand, we were heavily preparing for this Saturday night to bust on the most famous club of the city and were ready to take whole crew down. So later that evening, all the 6 police cars with SWAT forces and special units were ready to burst in and were heavily armored. We went in as civilians so that we were unrecognizable, but as we saw the main dealers and they were having some sort of deal upstairs, we initiated an operation, and just within seconds, quietly, we evacuated the whole floor, and now the only people that were in the club were the police force and dealers. Very, very cautiously and in a pretty precise and calculated manner, we started our raid and started to take down each cabin. Once some of them protested, so we had to take them with our taser guns. Since we were not in a very open space, it was very risky to shoot someone, so every equipment that we had was highly technical and with electrical impulses. As I went upstairs with my 2 of the best mates, and we bursted open the main doors. I was horrified to see the main drug dealer was sitting with my wife and they were calculating huge amounts of money and drugs were all over them. I was instantly stunned and simply could not utter a single word or move. Right away, my team burst in and immediately arrested them both. Since I was in such a shock, I had to instantly get out of the room to catch my breath because it was simply not possible what I was seeing. They both were instantly arrested and were charged with heavy drug dealing and its usage. Although she protested and said that she had no part to take in any of this situation, but all the medical reports and evidence said otherwise. The judge prosecuted them with a heavy fine, and they both were sentenced to jail for a very long time. At first, I was a little bit upset, but since I had anticipated this and expected this from the very start, I simply was not angry at all. But matter of fact, it was a blessing in disguise. The next day, as I came home, I found a very peaceful quietness in each room, which was a pretty big relief. I was so grateful to finally end this chapter of my life. Since once a cheater is always a cheater, it was no different in her case. I was immediately promoted to a higher ranks senior officer, which was a sign of good luck. I started to focus on my work, and just within a couple of months, she was not anymore in my life. I started to change for the best as I was focusing on my health, my career, and investing heavily on the well-being of my life. This was truly the best time of my life.